Welcome to an extension on simplifying negative radicals. OMG, I can't talk today. Okay, so you have already mastered simplifying radicals. You have already mastered solving using square root. You have already mastered quadratic formula. That is why you're here. If you answered no to any of that, then you need to go back and learn that content because we've got an assessment coming up. So today we are in our OMGs on page. Before you do that, remember, flip to your table of contents, page 3, and we are going to add negative radicals into our table of contents. Okay, you should know by now that anytime we have a negative under a radical, like negative 14, I have to say there are no real solutions. Okay, we had to do that earlier this week on a problem. There are no real solutions, but there is imaginary solution. So I'm going to teach you about the imaginary number right now. Okay, imaginary number. Because math loves imaginary things. Okay, so the imaginary number is I, and we like to write it with a little hooky job thing on there. Okay, so we write that little rounded I, and that's equal to the square root of negative 1. Okay, the square root of negative 1. So go ahead and write that down. Our steps are going to be identical to our steps on page 92 for simplifying radicals. The only difference is right here, where we write as two factors. So we always are going to write the perfect square first as a negative. So when we break this up, we're going to break it up to find the biggest perfect square that divides evenly, no decimals. And then we're going to write the two factors as multiplication. We're going to write the perfect square first as a negative. And then we're going to simplify our perfect square. And we cannot forget our I, our imaginary number. Pause the video, make sure you have these steps. Okay, so I went ahead and I just copied my perfect square list over. You don't need to copy it over because you already wrote it on page 92, but if you're like me and you need to have it close by, please, please, please go ahead and copy it right now. Mine's right here, but that is up to you. Okay, so first number I've got is the square root of 25. So when I look at this, I always look to see where 25 falls on my list. And I'm just going to ignore the negative for right now. So here is my 25. Oh my goodness, it is a perfect square. Now here's the deal. Technically, this is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 25. Okay, and I know the square root of negative 1 is I, and I know the square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. Okay, but we're not going to write it like I times plus or minus 5. Instead, what we're going to do, so we're going to get rid of this just for a second. And we are going to say that this square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. And the square root of negative is just I. So the final answer here is plus or minus 5I. Plus or minus 5I. Let's try another one. Let me erase this stuff. Oh no, I didn't know that was not on there. Let's write it again. So we said square root of negative 1 is equal to I. Okay, and I'm going to lock that into place so I don't do that again. Okay, so now I've got the square root of negative 147. Just like before, I'm going to see where it falls on my list. So 147 is right here. 147. So I'm not going to try any of those. I got to start at 144. And this is where I'm going to use Desmos, just like before. And I just kind of ignore that negative at first, and I'm going to deal with the negative after the fact. So 147 divided by 49. Oh, 147 divided by 144, oops, is a decimal. 147 divided by 121 is a decimal. 147 divided by 100 is a decimal. 147 divided by 81, decimal. 64, decimal. 49, hey, we got 3. So I'm going to break this up into the square root of negative 49 and the square root of 3. Notice how I made this one a negative because I want to take the I out with it when I do that. So I'm going to do the square root of negative 49 and the square root of 3. Now remember what we said. Because this is a negative, instead of just writing plus or minus 7, I'm going to throw an I at the end of it because it's together. So plus or minus 7i, and then square root of 3 has to stay the same. So there's plus or minus 7i square root of 3. Okay, next one. We have square root of 36. Okay, remember I always start by looking on my list to see where that falls. So square root of 36, OMG, is on my list. Okay, and notice that this one is positive. So if it's positive, no i's, no imaginary numbers. This one is just plus or minus 6. Okay, next problem, the square root of negative 200. So square root of negative 200 falls between here. Okay, and I want you to pause your video and I want you to try it yourself right now. Find the biggest perfect square and simplify this. Pause your video. Okay, welcome back. I hope that you split this up into the square root of negative 100 times the square root of 2. And once we do that, we know the square root of negative 100 is plus or minus 10i. And then we keep the square root of 2 the same. And that is our final answer. So remember, when we are simplifying negative radicals, all we have to do special is throw an I next to it, the imaginary number I. Okay, so you're going to have some practice now. Once you practice, there's one more thing I want to do. So you'll come back and watch one more video. Let your teacher know if you need any help.